Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you from wherever you're joining us today. My name is Mosunlayo Day, and on behalf of the African Philanthropy Forum, I would like to say best of 2021 to you, in spite of all that we have to cope with in a new year. And we're particularly excited to have you here today because this is our very first webinar of the year, and we're discussing a really topical issue, especially given the times that we're living in, examining how business and society can work more closely together to move the needle on development in Africa. Today, I have an amazing panel of speakers that will be led by Moki Makura, the Executive Director of Africa No Filters, and she's wearing two hats today. She's not just the moderator, but she's also the webinar chair. As an APF member, she's leading this conversation today and setting some context before we go into the panel. As you know, APF is a vibrant community of philanthropists and social investors that are committed to doing good on the African continent. And we have such a wealth of experience within the network, and we always like to leverage the knowledge and get our members to contribute from their wealth of knowledge as much as possible. So I'm going to hand over to Moki now to take us through the setting of the context for today's conversation and also introduce the speakers. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Mosu, and hello and welcome everybody to this webinar on how corporate philanthropy can change the narrative. As Mosu said, my name is Moki Makura. I'm the Executive Director of Africa No Filter. For me, this conversation comes at a particularly timely moment because COVID has hit this continent hard. And it's not just from a public health perspective. It's also had a huge economic impact on the livelihoods of millions of us Africans. At Africa No Filter, we spend time trying to understand the prevailing narrative. And one of the narratives we often hear is how dependent Africa is on outsiders, on foreign donors, on foreign philanthropists, on foreign investors. So this conversation about how corporate philanthropy can actually change the narrative is really quite an important one. So just to set the scene a little bit, for the first time since the Great Depression, both advanced and emerging economies are in recession. So there are estimates from the World Bank that suggest that the virus will push between 40 to 60 million people into extreme poverty this year. And of course, the region that will probably be the hardest hit will be sub-Saharan Africa. So two things in that I think we should pay attention to. One, that there will be more people needing support, and that the countries that we have come to depend on bail us out. The US, the UK, Germany, Japan, by the way, they're the top four biggest aid givers to the continent. These countries are battling their own issues at the moment. So we have to rethink our dependence on foreign aid. So the UN estimates that African countries are going to need in excess of $200 billion to cope with the socioeconomic costs of the pandemic. That doesn't include the emergency health spending. So where's that money going to come from? I think it's since 2013, foreign aid to Africa has been declining. Ironically, although the need is now greater, donor countries are spending less on the continent because they are using their money to fund recovery packages at home. Everyone's feeling this impact of COVID. African governments have tried to step up, but many are already in debt and a lot are facing huge costs just managing. So who's going to fill that gap? And the door is wide open for corporate philanthropy. Today, more African corporates are becoming more aware of their role as good citizens, that it's not just about doing well, that's important, but it's also about doing good. I mean, more corporates are looking to get involved in finding solutions to the really complex and persistent challenges that we seem to face on the continent. It's sort of the difference between, I think, the way a lot of corporates have given in the past, buying computers for a school or painting, the outside of a school and making it look nice, versus trying to tackle the broken education system that upholds it. So can African corporate philanthropy be the catalyst to help reset the continent? To help me answer the questions, I have a panel of experts who will be unpacking how corporate philanthropy can change the continent's narrative as donor dependent, simply by supporting the big issues that we typically left for the big donors to handle for us. But before I introduce everybody, please let us know who you are in the chat. Tell us where you're from, tell us your thoughts, tell us what you're thinking. And please post your questions. I think there's a Q&A button. I'll check that in a minute. Try not to put them in the chat because they'll get lost in the comments. And then use the hashtag APF webinar series for any comment you're going to make on social media. So let me go back to our panelists who you can all see. We've got 4 really good ones, and I'm not going to go into depth on their CVs. I'll tell you key things about them. The first thing is, our first person is Kathy Duff, who's the director of Trialogue, which is one of the very few consultancies on the continent that actually focuses exclusively on corporate responsibility issues. They conduct annual research into CSI practices of corporates. They've done it in South Africa, but they're also working in Kenya and Ghana. Hi, Kathy. Next is Knox. Oh no, I was hoping I wasn't going to do this, Knox. I'm sorry. Knox heads up the philanthropy office at Nedbank Private Wealth, and they provide specialist advice and services to wealth individuals on their giving. And then we've got Simi Nwogugu from Nwogugu. You won't even think I'm African the way I'm butchering your names. I am so sorry. Simi, who's the CEO of Junior Achievement Africa. She's she runs an NGO that equips
you
young.
need to wear a mask all times.
Do you guys want to mute until we come on? So I was just saying, Simi is the CEO of Junior Achievement Africa. That's an NGO that equips young Africans with financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and employability skills for future success. And last but not least on the panel is Ortega Ogra. Phew, nice and easy. Thanks, Ortega, for having a very easy name for me. He's the group head and brands and corporate communications lead at BUA. He also has oversight of corporate social responsibility. BUA Group, for those of you who don't know it, is a diversified African conglomerate with major business interests in food, mining, manufacturing, and infrastructure. So that is the panel that are going to help us unpack this topic about corporate philanthropy and where it's headed to. I'm going to start with Kathy on the conversation. So Kathy, you have been doing research into trends around corporate philanthropy. What is it you're seeing about African corporates? Are they stepping up? Are they getting more involved in strategic philanthropy?
Thanks, Moki, and thanks for the introduction, and thanks to APF for inviting me onto this webinar. Yes, as you mentioned, we've been doing research into corporate social investment, predominantly in South Africa, but we have also touched and done research in some other African countries, as you mentioned. And we've been doing this research for over 20 years. And when and I think, different countries are at different places in terms of the trends. But if we look broadly, and we also benchmark globally through our partnership with the CCP in the US, but if we look broadly, we've definitely seen in this 20-year period an increasing recognition that corporate social investment is vital, important. It can be a benefit for the business as well as society. So we have seen an increase in corporate social investment in this time. And if we look at, and I think one of the positive things to come out of the last year is that where companies might not have recognized the importance of CSI and of contributing to society, they certainly do now. And, I was chatting
Sorry, when you say now, is it because of COVID?
Yes, so many companies were doing it before and doing it well, and I can talk about some of the trends, but we've seen an increasing recognition at high levels. I was chatting to a CEO of a South African company just earlier this week who said, it's really hit home how intricately linked the business success is to the success of the country and the society in which they operate. And they've also seen unprecedented levels of private sector and public sector collaboration in the last year. So I think those are some positive things that came out of this, in terms of really at the highest levels, people recognizing the importance of investing in society and the collaborative initiatives that took place. In terms of trends, we've seen, and this is not just in across Africa, but also other emerging markets, that the most supported sector by corporates, by a long way, is actually education. Right. In South Africa, that sector receives half of all expenditure by corporates. And it makes sense because we always promote that corporates support causes aligned to their business, and companies are wanting to obviously build skills, both for their own workforces in the future, but also the country and the industries and sectors in which they operate as a whole. So we've seen that as a consistent thing over the 20 years is the focus on education. In terms of trends, we are seeing a shift slowly, and it's at different levels in different countries, to more strategic CSI. And what we mean by that is where companies are not just giving money to causes, but are really applying their core competencies and skills to the social problems in the country, which is not just about making donations. It's about using the skills in the company. It's about products, services, alignment. And through doing this, there's not only better social benefit or greater social benefit, because a telecoms company can really help with telecoms infrastructure in times of crisis and other times, and we've really seen that in COVID with the online learning coming into place. So not only is it greater social impact, but it's also greater impact for the business through their corporate social investment. And I think we've seen that shift over time towards more strategic CSI. Right. I'll stop there for now.
No, that's quite interesting, and probably not surprising about the fact that 50% of the funds goes towards education. But I'm going to bring you in now, Knox, because you do similar work in terms of you advise your wealthy clients about what they should be doing around philanthropy. What are you seeing in terms of trends?
Thank you. And very similarly to what Kathy has outlined, definitely even before COVID, we know that the economic environment was very fragile, particularly in our part of the world. So what that means is that there's actually less money to go around. So although during the pandemic, corporates have dug really deep into their pockets to provide the support to communities that is required, but going forward, we know that it's going to take a while for business levels. And what that also means is that there's going to be continued pressure in terms of the funding that is available. So there's definitely going to be an increasing narrowing down of focus areas, becoming more strategic, as Kathy has highlighted, and leveraging competencies across the business enterprise. So not just CSI pots, but where do other opportunities within the broader spectrum of business lie, where business can actually play a meaningful role in utilizing those competencies. So if you are a business that works in technology, how do you start to leverage your competencies and your skills and other resources in the work that you do to support communities, to support education? So that is a trend that we anticipate to continue strongly going forward, as we understand that the pressure is going to continue for some time before there is a lot more liquidity that is available to provide more funding to organizations and communities from a business perspective.
Right, thanks for that. And I'm going to test both your trend spotting theories out on our corporate philanthropist here, Otega. You heard what Kathy and Knox said. What do you think? Are you changing the way you do your philanthropy? Or are you being more strategic?
So beyond, they both mentioned something that was very critical, which is you see a lot more corporate philanthropists willing to use what skill sets they have within or what tools they have within to actually support their goals. But even more important than that, we've seen a radical shift from image philanthropy, to a lot more collaborative sort of philanthropy.
So tell me what you mean by image philanthropy.
I mean, prior to now, you would see most philanthropic activities targeted at things that gave the most visibility,
Right.
poverty, not necessarily what is needed. And this could sometimes be as a result of an outside-in sort of approach. Most of the funds were coming out from international or outside Africa. But now we're seeing a lot more, due to COVID especially, we're seeing a lot more African philanthropists standing up and stepping in to actually fill in the gap. Because just like you said in your presentation, a lot of funds that would come from outside no longer comes into Africa. So now we're seeing a lot more people within coming up, but they've also realized that one of the fastest and easiest and actually best ways to approach the giving is actually to collaborate. And we've seen it happen in Ghana, we've seen it happen in South Africa, we've seen it happen even in Nigeria, and on the AU front. And what it has done is it's allowed diverse organizations, diverse givers to come together, bring in whatever tools, whatever skills they have, whatever funds they have, with a common goal, with a common purpose to actually target things that need intervention. And it's actually working. The models will be corrected as time goes on, but I think there's hope.
So one of the things that I know you've said that EUA gave some like $30 million towards the COVID response. Was that more money than you typically spent before?
Oh, my budgets will hit very hard. But you see, it's a whole lot more than we would normally have given. Prior to now, we had very clear areas that we gave monies to, from education to healthcare to community engagement activities, and the rest. Sometimes disasters happen and then we give monies to that. But of late, especially with COVID, I remember the chairman, Abdul Samad Rabi, saying something that, see, Tega, at the end of the day, these are the people that buy our products. If we do not spend what we have to help them scale through this, then we might as well just wait for the entire world to go down and see if our business survives. And without thinking so much, he has committed himself and the resources of the organization towards helping. It's a whole lot more of money. On one end, we collaborated with the CACOVID. CACOVID is the Nigeria's private sector COVID-19 coalition. It has a couple of corporate and private givers on the platform, and we gave about, I think, 1.35 billion naira to them. But on BUA's own, we've also looked at data from organizations, all the stakeholders. We've looked at data from the government. We've looked at data from international organizations who are within Nigeria, and then we've used it to also channel funding. In some cases, we've channeled it to providing food supplies. In other cases, medical supplies, infrastructure. We've given ambulances to almost 25 states, and we're still giving more, to help bridge that gap.
I guess the question, this is very different to the kind of philanthropy that you've typically done. Is that what you're saying?
Of course, yes. Of course, okay. Yes.
So obviously COVID has been a big game changer for you, and I'm going to come back to that. But Simi, I want to bring you in here. You run Junior Achiever. You now run the Africa office, but you used to head up Junior Achievement Nigeria. And you have actually worked very well with corporates. And have you found over time that it's getting harder or easier to bring corporates in to giving to an organization like yours, which is actually a global organization, even though you're a Nigerian arm? Just tell me about your experience working with corporates.
I think it's easier now. We started in Nigeria 22 years ago when corporate philanthropy was basically not very strategic. It was something that they did at Christmas time. They would go to orphanages and give donations to, motherless babies' homes, or build, borehole in a village. Hard when we came in with the Junior Achievement model of corporate, and Junior Achievement is really based on corporate philanthropy globally. And so we had to start educating some of the companies that first signed on to be on our board, and then all the other companies we worked with. And it was in realizing the benefits to their employees that actually got them more interested, because the junior achievement model not only partners with the corporate in terms of check writing, we also encourage them to get their employees to volunteer in classrooms. And they saw the benefit of the camaraderie, the teamwork, the loyalty it increased to the company, because there suddenly was the sense of, oh, this company cares about the community that I live in. And so they started actually building philanthropy into their strategy. And so now, 22 years later, we have companies that have integrated corporate social responsibility strategies into their CSR. So that's on one hand. And on the other hand, what it's also done is that it has freed up the innovation of young people to, really develop solutions to problems, knowing that there are now more companies willing to partner with them to actually fund that solution. So it's really stimulated innovation. We have a number, millions, I would say, it feels like in Africa, or at least in Nigeria, where a lot of young people are developing solutions that they can easily implement, and then just partner with companies to do that. So I think it's a great trend that we're seeing across Africa, actually. And we hope that it continues into a double bottom line, where they are not just thinking of it as philanthropy, they're seeing it as necessary to business. Because I really like the point Ortega made, that if we don't save them, there's nobody that will buy our products. So it's not altruism; it's actually, business strategy.
Yeah, it's something that you actually have to do. Kathy, I'm gonna come back to you, because one of the things that you said is that corporate philanthropy is getting more strategic. But I'm curious to know whether or not you're finding that corporates are giving more money, and this is a very specific question, to foreign NGOs, foreign organizations working than local organizations, because that's a question and that's an issue that has come up, that when local NGOs, local organizations working on issues that are relevant to the continent, they're not getting the funds, but the money's going outside the country to come back in. Is that something that you've picked up at all?
So yes, I saw that question from Christy in the Q&A. Thanks. So most of the research that we do is focused on South Africa, and the vast majority of CSI that goes to nonprofits goes to local nonprofits in South Africa. I think there's a couple of drivers of that. Firstly, to say that not all corporate social investment necessarily goes to nonprofits. So we also ask that question. And certainly in South Africa, a lot of it goes. So if a company, for example, is building infrastructure, which a lot of the mining companies do, then obviously that money is not going to a nonprofit, it's going to a construction and engineering company. Similarly with training companies, we've seen a rise in the support of social enterprises. So it's not all going to nonprofits to start. But in South Africa, the money that does go to nonprofits is largely going to local nonprofits. This is partly incentivized by the regulatory structure in South Africa, which we've got the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment codes, which requires giving to South African nonprofits, and they have to be registered in a certain way, and the beneficiaries need to also be South African, which is actually in some ways means that South African corporates are more in South Africa than across the continent. But it also means that it does go towards the local nonprofits. We haven't asked that question in other countries, but I think it's an important point and one that we should.
I mean, Simi or Ortega, do you know about the context in Nigeria? Because it seems as if in South Africa, government incentivizes corporates to do this work. Is that the case in Nigeria?
So I'll first answer the first question you asked, Kathy, and then I'll come back to this one about money going to local versus international. And because we kind of straddle both at Junior Achievement, and we see the difference. And I think that corporates want to give money to people who speak their language. And so you find that a lot of the local smaller NGOs are not built, haven't built in their infrastructure to cater for the kind of accountability that the corporates are looking for. So do you have audited financial statements from reputable firms? Do you have a board that we can trust will, hold the executive director accountable to how this money is spent? So if it's just a one-man NGO or somewhere where the executive director has a lot of influence over how money is spent, you find that it's harder for them to get the corporate funding. And so what I would say for those NGOs that are local and are looking for corporate funding is to really invest time in building your governance structure, your board, and your accountability systems in a way that the corporations will be comfortable giving money. But I will say, yes, that we do find that even us, where we are, global standards and operate locally, we still have to spend more time convincing donors that we can do the job instead of you bringing in, somebody from the US. And so there is that struggle always to convince them that yes, we're African, but we are more than capable of executing this project. So that's one. Sorry, what was the question you just asked me?
Second question was oh gosh, even I've forgotten now. But it was about the regulatory environment in Nigeria, whether or not it supports corporate giving.
Yeah, so there's been a number of bills that the government has tried to put forward to regulate corporate giving. I think that if you have the right structure, you are able to, especially as an NGO, you are able to get the tax benefits. But for the companies, I think there are certain things they have to meet. So like banks, for example, have to set aside a certain percentage of their income to support financial inclusion and things like that. So if you are a nonprofit, you need to understand what is the regulatory framework. So I mean, financial literacy, for example, I know banks have to set aside some funds for financial inclusion strategies. If I'm able to educate the banks that, look, what I do meets the government's regulation or requirements, then they're able to partner with. So you find that organizations like us tend to partner more with banks. So it is to your benefit to understand what the government is saying to the corporate so that you can partner with them to help them develop their corporate strategy to meet that.
So I'll come back to, partnering with corporates and how best to target them. But Otega, just to ask you that question, is BUA, are you incentivized to give away more money by government, by policy?
Every corporate in Nigeria is incentivized. There are ways through which everyone can get some form of benefits from giving. But even beyond that, one of the things that we are yet to see is a clear-cut, the way that it is in South Africa, where you have very clear regulations as to giving and as to benefiting from giving. We're yet to have that in Nigeria. We are hoping that in due course, I know there are conversations that are ongoing, and sometimes these incentives are mentioned, maybe like in times of crisis, just like COVID. Hopefully, over time, the governments would come together and put the right things in place. But what you also have is in regulated industries, highly regulated industries, more often than not, they are forced to, the companies that operate in those industries are forced to actually do this. And then for those on the stock, for listed companies on the Nigerian Stock Exchange too, they also try to, persuade companies that are listed to actually give. So it's something we're getting to. Hopefully, in due course, we'll get there.
Okay, and if anybody in the audience knows what is happening in other countries, because believe it or not, there is more than South Africa and Nigeria in Africa. So be curious to know what other countries, the corporate environment in other countries is doing in terms of policy, whether or not companies are incentivized to give. Please post stuff in the chat, and also don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat because they get lost. Knox, I'm coming to you. Something that you said in a previous conversation was that you're seeing the profile of the kind of clients that you deal with at NetBank Private Wealth change, that the philanthropists are getting younger. Why is that? What are you seeing? And are their interests different to the interests of, you know, say their father or the mother or the older person who probably made the money in the first place?
Yes, definitely, Moki. So we work with both individuals, families, as well as corporates. And if we look at the profile of wealthy individuals and families, definitely the profile is starting to shift. Firstly, we are seeing, and I guess it comes hand in hand with the transfer of wealth to the next generation. So the traditional benefactor, who was your elderly male, white male typically, that is starting to shift towards more the younger generation. So the younger generation, and as they inherit the family wealth, they are becoming more involved. We're also seeing that in previous profile, individuals would wait until their sunset years to start giving. So you focus on accumulating your wealth, preserving your wealth as an individual family, and later on, you then start to think about how else can I give back and what else can I do, which then talks to leadership, self-actualization, and leaving a legacy. But with the younger generation, we're seeing that the individuals that are creating wealth earlier on through entrepreneurship and business ventures much earlier, they are more enterprising, but also there doesn't seem to be a separation between the philanthropy and the business. So they essentially are involved, and those two are so closely aligned in the sense that through my business, I need to see how I can solve societal problems. And some ventures are set up in that manner. The core focus is around focusing, sorting and solving social issues and social ills. And that's where we've seen the rise in your social entrepreneurs. So the profile is definitely changing. And in our South African context, where previously your traditional benefactor has been white male, as I've mentioned, we're seeing to start that to tip slightly. And we're seeing a lot more African. And I must be specific that the private wealth parameters at Nedbank, where we look at individuals that earn a minimum of 1.5 million or have 5 million investable assets. And we've been conducting
1.5 million, is it, sorry, just talk about currency, 1.5 million what? Is this rand or
in
dollars?
In rands.
So
that's at the entry.
Can we quickly convert
So
that? Just want an idea of what that actually means in other money? In US dollars?
In other money, that would be just, I'd say just under or just over $100,000. And that's at the entry level of our business,
right.
essentially.
Right.
So that's right at the bottom of the pyramid. And so we've been conducting research, which has demonstrated with the recent reports that we are seeing an increase in people of color that are fitting that profile and that are involved in philanthropy, which is a most welcome shift that we have been observing more recently.
Right. In fact, that's an interesting segue into sort of just looking at, you know, do Black people give as much as white people? Is that an issue? I mean, and you know, because there's this thing in Africa that, you know, Ubuntu, which is a South African phrase, and that we generally give. You know, I'm going to ask anybody, Ortega, Simi, Kathy, you can't answer. You know, is there a thing that, you know, Black people don't give as much? And why is that?
Well, I'll take that from the Nigerian perspective. I know that for a long time, it was difficult for us to raise money from individuals. And it's because, and you know, others can speak about other cultures, but in Nigeria, you find that you cater for a lot of people around you. So your nanny, your driver, you pay the son's school fees or their daughter's school fees, you know, pay for their medical, you know. So a lot of people, when you go to them and you say, you know, donate to Junior Achievement, they're like, you know, I'm already taking care of all my drivers and my, you know, my children's nannies, children and everything that, you know, that's all my philanthropy. And so it's only those who are now in an income bracket where they have the extra to give. But I do think, yes, we are a very philanthropic community. It's just not measured in annual reports of NGOs because it's done mostly privately. And I think those
it's called a black tax.
Exactly.
It's called a black tax. Yeah, we all know that. Otega, let me bring you in on that quickly. And I don't want to make it an issue, but I'm just curious.
So I'll answer it from 2 points of view. One, despite the black tax, we have a lot of people giving, individuals giving on a small scale. All you need to do is go on social media and you see the number of young people who are actively, either providing things for their communities, from food stuff to, educational resources and everything. It happens on quite a large scale. Unfortunately, it's like most things in Africa, a lot of things happen in the informal sector that is never formalized, and we are never able to track that level of giving. On the larger scale, as it relates to people like us, or even the level before big corporates like us, you have a lot of young people who are now exposed to the benefits of giving, actually driven from a more altruistic point of view than the bigger corporates. Case in point, I would use, there was this organization which we supported last year, and the name of the organization I think was Food Click. What they basically did during COVID was give meals, boxed meals, about 30 meals in a box, costing about $10 to $15 per box to people. And by the end of the first half of the lockdown, they had fed about 1 million people in Lagos and surrounding environments. The moment they approached us for funding, what did we ask? How do we believe that you are doing this? What do you have? And they showed us, they had a dashboard where you could track where the meals were going to. You could track everything that came in. This is a local organization. They've been doing this for 11 years and no one actually knew that much about them and what they were doing. But over time, you could also see that more young people were the ones that gave them the opportunity to, scale their giving. You had two young men, I think, Sheitinubu and Frederick Nazar, come together and look for corporates like us and say, see, these guys are doing well. They had the access to us, and they brought, it was basically matching an NGO with a wonderful structure who had done everything they ought to do with a corporate donor that had money. And Boa gave them money. A lot of Nigerian organizations gave them things. But what it took, I think, PepsiCo Foundation, seeing what they had done and seeing the extent to which local corporates had given to them, to also come and say, hey, you've done 1 million meals. Why don't you expand this by doing an equal amount of meals? And today they're able to extend and sustain the program longer than they actually need. They actually decided to. So it's happening. Giving is happening formally and informally, and I mean there's a gap for people like APM. Yes, to see how we can. Yes.
Okay, so Kathy, let me come back to you, because one of the things that we've talked about, I think generally, is just the strategic nature of the giving, how it's changing. And something you said is that you're seeing clients get more aligned in their giving to their business, as in, so if you are, I don't know, SAB Breweries or something, you might give to a charity that's working on alcohol abuse, or I don't know, maybe that's a situation. I guess the question for me is that when things like COVID happen, where everything goes out the window and it's literally about feeding people, are organizations becoming more strategic? Because we've said that COVID is a game changer, but COVID is like, drop everything and let's just, feed our staff and make sure they're okay. Is this, strategic alignment really happening? And do you think it'll go back to that? Or do you think COVID has just changed everything?
It did change things, but I don't think in that way for the long term. So I think the strategic nature of giving will continue, and that trend will continue. And just by the way, SAB does some amazing things in terms of tavern education programs, logistics programs of distributing stuff around the country. So, other than your actual product, if you think about your logistics, your stuff, there's so much you can do. But you're right. When we surveyed corporates last year, a lot of them had responded to COVID. A lot of them had found funds, as we've heard from Otega and also what Knox said, outside of their budgets, giving more than they would normally give to respond to COVID. And those areas, there was a mixture of strategic and non-strategic. So we did see a lot of companies contributing their manufacturing facilities for PPE, for sanitizers. We did see them doing strategic giving of that nature. But we also saw in our survey a lot of companies shifting from majority education to food security and to healthcare, including some education. So we did see a shift, we did see a responsiveness, a reactiveness. I think two things going forward. One is that we may actually see a slight decline in the level of corporate investment, because corporate social investment, because companies did dig deep, did give more, but now we've seen the economy is kind of decimated, and that will flow through into the levels of giving in the coming year. But I also think we'll see a shift back to the more strategic, more aligned giving.
Mark, if I can come in there as well. I think what COVID
please.
has also sort of catalyzed for us, particularly in our region, is really the move to providing more flexibility when supporting organizations, where previously we've been so prescriptive to say, I'm giving you X amount of rands or dollars, and you can only do X and Y with this money. And I think COVID has really demonstrated the importance of providing flexibility when supporting organizations. It talks to trust as well. We need to trust our partners more, that they actually are the ones that are involved and are knee deep with the work. They understand their needs more than we do. And also just really focusing on the importance of providing support and capacity beyond just cash to organizations. We need to ensure that organizations and partners that we work with, and civil society organizations in general, that they are resilient, that they've got the right kind of capacity to cope with disasters, to be able to respond and to react. And I think going forward, that's a trend that we anticipate to remain with us post-COVID, providing more flexibility in terms of the funding, and also just focusing more on helping organizations build the right capacity and internal resilience.
I really like what you said about not just, giving cash. It's actually, there are other ways organizations can support smaller ones. Let me go to Q&A. So I'll take some questions from the group. There's one from Oyinye, who asks about corporate partnerships, that because most corporate philanthropy is carried out in a very tokenistic way, it's often hard to scale, the impact. So she's suggesting a better model would be partnerships to galvanize resources and efforts, scale at large, and contribute to defined national development priorities. I guess the question is that how then can corporate partnerships be formed to help philanthropy and social responsibility be more effective? Again, maybe Knox or Kathy, you can actually take this. Are you seeing kind of more people wanting to collaborate? Is this a thing? Is there a way we can do it? Are there platforms that can allow them to do that?
Okay.
Kathy,
Yes.
you're smiling. Go on.
Well, I wasn't sure if Knox was gonna come in first there.
You can go for it. You can go, Kathy.
Okay. Yes, we see so much, talk of this all the time, and it does seem obvious that, coming together and pooling funds towards national goals would be a better outcome. But collaborative efforts are extremely difficult and long-term. And so what we see, and we've seen this even before, there are a number of collaborative efforts that most of them focus around specific sectors or specific issues that companies contribute to. But at the same time, companies usually do some of their own programming alongside that. I think another positive outcome from the last year and what happened with COVID is that we saw increased collaboration. So certainly, again, in the case of South Africa, there was a solidarity fund set up with a lot of pro bono support from companies, but also a lot of financial support from companies and philanthropists. There was better collaboration, not only between the private sector and putting that fund together, but also the private sector and government, as I mentioned earlier. So it was almost like a step change in collaboration. And one of the things that we hope is, how can we continue this, not just in the response to COVID, but to address some of the other big issues. Knox, I'll hand over to you.
Knox, were you going to add anything more to that?
Yes, and maybe just to echo Kathy's sentiment, there's often a lot of talk about collaboration, but the reality is it is so hard. You need someone who's going to actively coordinate and collaborate these conversations and next steps, and really have the right patrons, especially if you're talking cross-sectoral collaborations. We definitely need collaborations where we are partnering with government, because ultimately a lot of the sectors that we're trying to shift, including healthcare and education, those are public sector systems. And you don't ultimately want to just run parallel systems alongside them. You want to actually fix the main systems, because the beneficiaries that get support and have access to support that is provided by nonprofits and corporates are marginal. The bulk of the society are still trapped in those main public sector systems. And that's where we need those cross-sectoral collaborations. And they do require a lot of effort and a lot of resources to actually drive the collaborations. And as Kathy said, they are long-term, and it does require donors to make some sort of concessions, in that your ideas may get swallowed up and we end up leading with other contributors' ideas, and you need to be okay with that. And also from a reporting perspective, because especially if you're talking cross-sectoral collaborations with government and other partners, they can be very large, and at times the granular kind of detail of reporting and impact that you are used to, you may not see in the immediate term. But I think it is having an advocacy sort of view, long-term view, to say it is aligned to national priorities, and we are working with the right stakeholders to shift the big systems.
Okay, so no, thanks for that, Knox. I kind of feel that this panel is split into two. Hold on 1 minute. I think it's the advisors and the ones who are looking, and then we've got the doers. That's Ortega and Simi, who are actually doing the giving and doing the receiving and doing the work. So Ortega, let me ask you, and I know you wanted to say something, but I just want to ask you some of the things that we've just talked about collaboration. I mean, are you interested in collaborating, or is it still very much this is our, okay, don't let me finish that sentence. Are you interested in collaborating?
So the truth is, the way forward is collaboration. What collaboration has done, using the experience from the last year for us, is it's enabled us to look at things from a broader perspective. You have a larger pool of minds to, butt heads together. You have a larger pool of resources and all that. In actual fact, we might actually be spending less than we would have spent if we had gone it alone.
Okay.
So
so let me be specific. Give me an example where you have collaborated, because we understand the benefits are there. Okay. Is there an example that you can pull out where you...
The biggest example that we can say is the COVID private sector coalition for COVID-19. And it's attacked this from various angles, from the policy point of view to helping build infrastructure, to providing funds for various initiatives, and we also at different points in time provided food supplies and all that. And what we've seen is you have various people on the coalition. You have the private sector, you have individuals who are philanthropists, you have the government stakeholders, you have international development stakeholders, you also have auditors, different. So it's a very, very big machine. It's still being fine-tuned as we go on, because this was started at the beginning of the lockdown last year. But we've been able, yes.
No, I was going to say, so was this your first time? Because that was COVID. COVID triggered that. I'm trying to figure out, is this the first time that you have collaborated outside of COVID?
On such a scale, yes. Okay. Prior to COVID, we were actually in conversations with one or two bodies to see how we could collaborate on some things. But COVID was a university for us. I mean, it gave us an opportunity to see proper collaboration in action.
Fantastic.
And I must say the results have been positive. It's something that we'll look at doing a lot more, and hopefully those on the other side, the spenders of the money, as the case may be, would put in the right structures, will put in the right systems, and to help us have more confidence in giving our resources towards that.
I love that COVID was a university. I think that's great. It's been a lot of things. I don't think I've ever heard it called university, but Simi, let me ask you, this is a question from a lady called Liz Fanning, who I actually do know from Core Africa. Do companies look at impact in their funding decisions? It's something that potentially Otega could answer, but I'd love to hear from you, being a person that actually works with corporates. Do they feel they have enough data? Are you able to give them data, or is impact or something that is not so important because it's really just the chairman's kind of, you know, donation to an organization?
Yeah. Yes, definitely they look at impact. And I think even more now than before, where there's so many nonprofits doing similar things, that the way that they're able to determine who to go with is who really is measuring impact. I think prior to now, we had organizations who were very interested in reach. How many people have you reached? Reach 1 million, reach 10 million. Now there's more focus on impact, like the people that you have reached, what's the demonstration? And we've had, I think over the past 4 or 5 years, more tools for measuring and evaluation, and for even determining impact. What is the difference between outcome and impact? So outcome is the immediate impact of, you know, your program, but impact is really more of a longer term, you know, because they did this program in junior achievement, they were able to get this job, you know, 5 years down the line. And so nonprofits who are really tracking that impact are better able to get the resources they need. And then very quickly, to go back to the collaboration question, I think it works best when each party knows what they're good at and they stick to that. We found that the collaborations that haven't worked are when, you know, government is trying to do, you know, private sector, and private sector is trying to do what the NGO should be doing. And we've been able to really achieve success with collaboration at junior achievement, because we bring in the funds from the private sector, we bring in the government to contribute the schools and the educational tools, and then we bring in the expertise of converting the curriculum to the appropriate ages. And so it's really a good marriage of skills and everybody knowing what they are good at and doing that.
Right. Thank you, Simi. I'm going to take another question from Stephen Saniels, who asks, in Europe, we see a clear trend that corporates are moving beyond grant giving into loans to social enterprises and even equity, setting up social impact funds, etc. Is this trend visible in Africa with African businesses? Kathy, can you take that one? Is there a trend towards loans?
Not yet. So it's something we've been tracking. It's something we talk about at our conference, are these new financing methods, loans, social impact bonds, etc. We've seen some of the last 2 years in South Africa, but they're relatively new. And I think the way a lot of corporate social investment is currently structured, and specifically if it's structured as a foundation, which I think a lot of companies in Africa do, there are actually some limits on how that can give, and it normally does need to go to a kind of registered nonprofit organization. Saying that, obviously this can happen outside of CSI, outside of the foundation, and I mentioned it earlier, we are seeing a slight increase, although it's still less than, well, it's probably less than 5% of the giving going to social enterprises. And when we ask the question about loans, it's still very nascent. So I don't think it's a trend here yet. It's something that we are tracking. It's something that we are trying to build an awareness of by drawing on examples from across the globe. And I think it's something we will see in the future, but it's not big yet.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So,
we've got
okay.
like roughly. Sorry, Otega.
In Nigeria, actually, there are a couple of organizations that are doing it already. But what the trends we're seeing now is that these things are becoming highly risky. So the enabling environment is not there for them to actually thrive. So you see a lot of defaults. And I think the questions funders will start asking is, how can you guarantee that you're not burn through funds that you've received, trying to help a lot of these organizations who more often than not, will not be able to pay back. We've seen it happen in the government context where, you give funds, certain interventions are done, and they're called interventions, and to farmers, to small scale industries and everything, default rates are very high. So the question now is, how do we, are we going to use AI, using people's spending habits or whatsoever to determine how to channel these funds, or to determine which organizations are best to receive these funds? It's a question that we need to ask ourselves, but that is there. It's happening right now in Nigeria, but that is the major challenge with that.
Right. Okay, so we've got a few more minutes left before we need to wrap up. So I just want to go around and ask everybody just one question about the future of philanthropy. What is the big thing that you think needs to happen on the continent for African philanthropy, corporate philanthropy, to kind of fill that gap that we're talking about, so that we are not entirely and constantly and perpetually dependent on foreign funders, on foreign foundations? What is the single thing you think needs to happen? And just in a sentence or two. Let's start with Kathy, and then Knox, and then Simi, and then Oteka.
Thanks. The single thing. So I know, focusing on corporates and speaking from the South African experience, and now we've seen it in India, that regulation can help. It can help. Also to say, I don't think it's necessarily the role of corporates to fill a gap. The giving that they do needs to be strategic, needs to be aligned to their business, etc. So I think that first, and then secondly, I'd say if there was one thing, it's probably looking at the regulatory frameworks and how they incentivize philanthropy and giving across the different countries, because we've certainly seen it made a difference here in South Africa. We've seen it making a difference now in India, where they've introduced a similar regulatory framework.
Okay, Kathy, I would ask you, but I'll ask you then, who's going to fill that gap if corporates don't? But that's another question, maybe for another webinar. Knox, what's the single thing that you think needs to happen in philanthropy?
I was also going to say a more enabling environment, Moki, but since Kathy has covered that, I think for me, philanthropy can really play that strategic and catalytic role in supporting more innovation, more research, and a focus on entrepreneurs, especially young people. Philanthropy has tended to be risk averse in the past, in the sense that we want programs with a track record that can demonstrate what they've been able to do in the past. I think we now need to take a bit more risk and really focus on innovation, technology, and really enabling young people to come up with bright ideas that can potentially help us in really solving some of the issues that we are all trying to pour our efforts into.
Right. Thank you, Knox. And Simi, organizations with a track record, that's you guys.
I think Knox and Kathy really took the words out of my mouth, because I started to write down here that, because of COVID, Africans have been forced to innovate at unprecedented levels. You go to restaurants in Nigeria now, you have to, scan the QR code to see the menu and things like that. So, COVID, though it was, unfortunate, has forced innovation. And I think that the one thing related to what Knox just said is really for people to know what they're good at and stay out of the way of innovation. So government should not over-regulate or, try to hurt innovation in terms of clamping down on young people doing things. Really let the young people innovate, and then highlight the ones that are really good and support them. Because once you do that, you find a lot of people who are willing to experiment with you, come up with solutions and fund it. And corporate, really the expertise there is the efficiency, the resource allocation, and that's what they're good at. So if everyone does what they're good at and they allow the young social entrepreneurs to innovate and support and fund them, then we will have a better society.
Right, that's something we didn't really touch on, what the private sector actually brings to philanthropy. But Otega, what's your take? What's the one thing that you feel needs to change or happen?
For me, it's the fact that because of, I mean, the ever-changing environment, there has to now be a more strategic and systemic approach to corporate investments. In line with this, we would expect that there's more collaborative philanthropy, like I said at the start of my conversation, because the money is there. Yes, it's not an inexhaustible fund, but the money is there. The incentive to give is what we've not really tapped into. As of 2018, there was about $2.8 billion worth of spending on corporate philanthropy. It's expected that will rise, that will triple to about 7 point something billion.
Was this across Africa or in Nigeria?
Across Africa. I think that was a report from the African Philanthropic Network. So what we now need to see are the NGOs, those who liaise with the end users of these funds or whatsoever. They need to put in proper mechanisms that will guarantee sustainability of projects, proper mechanisms that will guarantee indicators for success, measurement, and evaluation. And then we also need a sit down, more or less, where for this collaboration to thrive, those who are getting these grants, there must be a clear objective. I mean, what are they expected to do with the grants? Those given the grants, what are they expected to do? I mean, what's the strategy behind this collaboration? Once we can settle all that, it will be easier for us to do this corporate giving in a collaborative manner. And this is something we should look into. It's less stressful for us. It's easier to manage, it's easier to monitor, it's easier to evaluate. And hopefully Africa would start to take care of itself rather than relying on external funding to do a lot of these things.
Don't even hope. In Jesus' name, as we would say, and anything to take the stress off corporate Nigeria, anything to take the stress off. So I want to say thank you to my panelists, to Kathy, to Knox, to Simi, and to Atega for what has been an interesting conversation. I don't know how much we've moved thinking or moved people's perceptions of how corporate philanthropy will change in the future, but I think there is definitely a trend that things are shifting, things are moving. And thanks to COVID University, to use Otega's words, let's hope it keeps on teaching us and keeps us getting better as philanthropists. I'm going to hand back to Mosun to wrap up, I guess. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Moki, for such a stimulating conversation. I think it's a fantastic way to end. We don't want to hope, we want to do. We want to move from talking to action and seeing the needle actually move on the continent. Thank you so much, Moki. Thank you to all our speakers, Kathy, Otega, Knox, and Simi for preparing for this and keeping us engaged for 1 hour. I won't take up much of your time. I just want to mention that I saw a couple of points in the Q&A and also just the general chats around community giving and faith-based organizations. And I think it's important to mention that those are conversations we're going to be having in the upcoming months because community foundations play an important role, and a lot of giving in Africa takes place through faith-based organizations and even looking at Africans in the diaspora. So those are critical conversations we're going to be having, and please keep an eye out for information regarding those webinars. And let's not end this conversation here. Let's continue on social media on our handle at APF.org using the hashtag APF Webinar Series. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your week, and please stay safe. Bye-bye.